Hi YouTube, it's Catherine Michelle. We're here today with Russell, and we are going to be going over the forensic psychology aspects of the crime. Hey Russell, how you doing?
I am fine, thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad to have you here with me today. How's life been treating you since the last time you talked to Dan?
Slow, uneventful, at times boring, but I'm very grateful that I got to be here in the States to take care of some VA medical issues before I head back overseas.
Well, I'm glad you're here too, and you're funny. I bet your wife can't wait for you to get back home. Today, what I said, what we're going to be covering is actually the psychological aspect of the case. I know we go over a lot, we meaning Dan Hennon, Greg Fernandez Jr., myself, and a lot of others who are now starting to do their own videos, which I think is awesome because it's just bringing more attention to the case. But we all have tended to look at the crime scene itself and looking at it from a criminal aspect. So again, today we're going to cover the psychological aspect. So Russell, I think it's really important well, first of all, before I ask you this first question, again, one last time, can you give your credentials?
Okay, I have a BS in counseling psychology. I have an MA in human sciences with a concentration in psychology, in other words, the behavioral aspect of psychology. And I have a postgraduate degree, certificate, diploma, whatever you want to call it, in forensic science from Ashworth University. I have also stuff that's relevant to our conversation here. I have also did a 2-year volunteer internship, whatever you want to call it, with a criminal investigative division of a sheriff's department that's located in Maryland. And so I did that for 2 years. And then I taught for 3 years at Washington Adventist University. I taught an intro course to forensic psychology, then an intro course to forensic anthropology.
Well, I think you're then more than qualified to answer the questions I have of you today. I'm sorry if some of them are going to seem kind of mundane or rudimentary, but I really feel it's important that we start at the basics here and then through time work our way up. So my first question for you today is, what exactly is forensic psychology?
Okay, and before we can understand what is forensic psychology, we have to understand what is forensics. And so forensics has an ancient lineage to Rome, and it means basically the marketplace, a marketplace. In other words, in reference to, at that time, people who were learned used to come together in a single place, and they used to talk about things about society, philosophical issues, science, you know, all the things that are going on. So that's, and it actually is a Latin word, and it comes from forensis, and meaning the marketplace, or a place of meeting, a market. But in today's, where that comes in for today is forensic. Forensic is the application of science as it applies to law, as it applies to the courts. Now, forensic psychology is, in a rough definition, forensic psychology is the ideals or the tenements of psychology as it applies to the court system or as it applies to the legal system. But there's also the other definition where it is you have science mixed in with the tenements of psychology as it applies to to the court system, but the broad definition is just the tenements of psychology as it applies to the court system.
That's far different than I think a lot of people who assume what forensic psychology means. I've run into a lot of people who believe that the word forensic somehow means like a crime scene or something like that. But in what you're telling me is you're looking at the psychological aspects of something and then how it applies to the law, or how the law then applies to that psychology aspect?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm glad we got that straight. Go ahead.
Is because too many people, there's always a misnomer. People think of forensics, and the first thing they think is CSI. I think that is a horrible misjustice and a horrible carriage. I mean, talk about a misnomer, but forensic psychology is basically where you have the area of science. You have science, and then you have something that tacks along with it. Forensic entomology, forensic anthropology, forensic biology, forensic psychology, forensic psychiatry, and on it goes. And you take those disciplines, those tenements, and then you apply it to science, you apply it to law. And so then it's how those subjects or those areas intermingle itself with jurisprudence, the law.
Okay, you kind of, the system kind of lost you there for a minute. I don't know if you're too far away from your speaker or talking too fast, but can you repeat that very last part, please?
Okay. Where people make a mistake is they just look at the word forensics and they forget all the other attachments that come along with it. Forensics in and of itself is just how science, the application of science, the empiricalness of science in how it is applied to the judicial system. Now, when you have like forensic biology, forensic entomology, forensic anthropology, forensic psychiatry, forensic psychology, computer forensics, anything like that, it's an attachment. It's how those extra attachments, how they interplay with science, and then how they are applied to law.
Okay, that is so interesting. It seems like there's so much more that's, embedded into that entire field. Okay, to start with our questions about the Crowley case, my first question for you is, let me go back, jump back here. What education is needed to work in the field of forensic psychology?
Okay, now just to work, if you want to just work as a crime scene tech or a crime scene analyst or something of that sort, all you need is a master's. You need a master's in the appropriate field that you're going into. A master's in English is not going to cut it. So you need a master's in criminology. You need a master's in forensic science. You need a master's in forensic anthropology, a master's in psychology, something like that. Now, in order to be called a forensic psychologist, a forensic psychiatrist, those two, you got to have an MD for forensic psychiatry. Then for forensic psychology, you have to have a PhD. And if you go and you call yourself, oh, I'm a forensic psychologist, and all you have is a master's, and that's what you're putting, this is what you're pushing yourself off as, that is illegal. You cannot do that. Now, I can work in the area of forensic psychology with a master's degree in the area of forensic investigative psychology. See, investigative psychology, all I need is a master's. I need to have a master's in psychology, a master's in criminology, master's in science, in forensic science, something along those lines. But if you do not have a minimum of a master's, you could probably be a tech with a BS in criminology. But if you really want to really be respected, if you want people to listen to you, to take you serious, you should have a master's or above.
Okay, I think it's pretty clear that you have you have those qualifications, and wow, just a lot of schooling. I did not realize how much schooling went into it. Okay, so I want to get into the questions now regarding the psychological aspect of the crime scene. And in that regard, how would forensic psychology then be used within a crime scene such as the triple homicide of the Crowley family?
Well, normally you have a subfield of that area, which is behavioral sciences, because psychology, it'll only take you just so far. But if you have a subcategory or a subdiscipline of forensic psychology, which is the behavioral science, investigative psychology, that sort of thing, then how you would use that is you would go into a crime scene and you always work on a grid pattern, and you look at the crime scene from the outer going to the inner, and the body, or the actual center point of the crime, is the last place you should be looking at. So what you do is you look for, telltale signs. You look for footprints, of course. You look for any type of trace evidence that has been left behind. Cigarette butts, toothpicks, snap twigs that may have hair or something. You look for those sort of things. And then as you're working your way in, then you look to see, well, you're looking to see, how was the scene disturbed? How was it disturbed? When was it disturbed? Who possibly could have disturbed it? And then as you're going in, you're looking at, was this a crime of passion? Was this just something that was on the fly? Was it organized? Was it disorganized? How much anger is shown in the scene itself? And so then as you're getting closer and closer and closer to the actual center part of the crime scene itself, then you look to see how the bodies are displayed. Because a lot of times that's very crucial, because a lot of times how bodies are displayed is going to tell you, or could be an indication or an indicator of whether the crime scene staged, what kind of crime it was. And so you're looking at that. You're looking at the placement of the body. You're looking at the environment. As you're looking at the body, you're also scanning the immediate environment around you. What kind of blood splatter is there? Is the place disheveled? Is it, you have markings? Do you have things there? Are things missing that should be there? Are things there that shouldn't be there? So you're looking for all that, because you're looking at the behavioral aspects of it.
Okay, just again, wow. So, it seems like you guys have to take in like so much information. It's kind of crazy. Basically, also from looking at the crime scene from a forensic psychology standpoint, what type of personality, or can you then say, and this is in regards to strictly the Crowley triple homicide, what type of personality would commit this type of crime? Or again, can you say that?
It depends on the crime scene. Now, you take, for example, the Green River Killer, Edward Shawcross. You take Shawcross, and you can, if it's a singular person, you can, by looking at either Edward Shawcross, which is the Genesee River Killer. Then you have the Green River Killer. Then you have BTK. See, when you have a single person, then you can tell by going to one crime scene and going to the next one, then going to the next one. You can sit there and you can deduce what kind of person you're dealing with. Is this person organized? Is this person disorganized? Is this person a psychopath? Is he, there's many things, how you can determine, or you get an inkling or an idea of what kind of individual you're dealing with. Now, as it relates to one very famous was the Charles Manson murders. You cannot. And Charles Manson murders are in there with the David Crowley case. You have a case where you don't have a singular perpetrator. The crime scene itself shows multiple perpetrators. And when you have a crime scene that shows multiple perpetrators, it then becomes indeterminate. And I have to voice that very strongly. It becomes indeterminate as what type of criminal you're dealing with, because then what you're dealing with basically is what we call groupthink. And what I mean by groupthink is you don't have an individual deciding of or by herself or himself what they're going to do. You actually have a group of people who decided on a plan, who went in, who executed a plan, who followed through with the plan. And when you're dealing with that, then it becomes almost impossible to sit there and say, oh, they were psychotic, or oh, they were this, or oh, they were that. No, that is not good. Then the crime scene becomes indeterminate because it's a group of people coming in. Now, you can have a group of people, and you can say a group may act like this, or it seems like this group is doing this, but you cannot be definitive as if you're dealing with Ted Kaczynski, or you're dealing with Jeffrey Dahmer, or you're dealing with John Wayne Gacy, the Night Stalker. You cannot, Son of Sam, and on and on and on it goes. You cannot sit there and say, oh, this person is this way. No, because once it becomes a group, then it's indeterminate. You can't tell, because more than likely that group has been hired by someone else. And to sit there and try, and if you're professional people this is the problem, if you're professionals and you're hired to do a job, you're not crazy, you're not off your rocker, you're not psychotic, you're not narcissistic, you're a group who's professional, who has been hired, they're doing a job. That's it. That's all it is to them, is a job, unless you have somebody go off script, and then you can maybe pinpoint to that certain individual who went off script. But as long as they follow their script, as long as they follow their job, it's indeterminate.
Okay, because a lot of people, and I'm sure I said it too, it's like you look at this crime scene and it's like, oh, these people have got to be psycho, sociopathic, crazies, all this other stuff that, we tend to put these labels on. But in reality, they could just be a group of people, and there could be a sociopath amongst them or a psychotic person amongst them, but they had this mind think, as you put it, and they could very well be normal in their everyday lives, but this one event sent them off in a whole different direction, so that wouldn't then make them psycho or psychotic.
No, it's a job.
Okay.
I know it sounds harsh to think that way, but they are doing a job.
Yeah, and that's tough to think about it that way. So, and then in that same line, then, would you consider this crime scene, the David Crowley crime scene only, would you consider this a crime of passion?
No. Everything about this, see, when you have a groupthink mentality, or when you have a group of people coming in and they have a plan, they're executing a plan, passion has nothing to do with it, unless, once again, you have the Yahoo and I know this is an unprofessional term, but he goes off script. But as long as they stay script, there's no passion. They have a job. It's cold, it's clinical, it's to the point, and boom, that's it. Now, if you have that type of group, if you have that type of mentality that's being shown in your crime scene, then if those individuals try to make it look like a crime scene of passion or something like that, then that's a very easy to tell. You can tell, because if you're paying attention to how the bodies are placed, if you're paying attention to the type of clothes they're wearing, if you're paying attention to the blood splatter, if you're paying attention to the items in the room that may have been interacted with or may not have been interacted with, if you're looking at the things that should be there that are there but aren't there, and stuff that is there that shouldn't be there, I mean, no, then that's not a crime of passion. Is something that is done normally by an individual. It's normally on the cuff, on the fly. It's normally caused by a really intense internal anger. And so you have this person who has a rage, who has an anger, and he or she has got to get it out. That is going to show itself in the scene. But if you have a group of people, then no, it can't be. It's a job.
Okay, so what is it about this particular crime scene that then tells you, according to forensic psychology, that this was a group and not an individual?
Well, you're looking at this. There's too many things going on for a single individual to have completed it in the time that the bodies say passed. Okay, you have how the bodies. First of all, not everyone died at the same time. You have different points of death. You have different methods of death. Not all of them died the same way. You have, from the girl who had the broken ribs with her arm being dislocated or taken off completely. Then you have the unbelievable thing about the Quran with this. I mean, if he went out and he committed this crime, and he would have to be the teacher of Einstein. Seriously, when you have to think about physics and all that, and how he's going to do all this, and then land perfectly. I mean, land perfectly with his extremities falling on the Quran, with where the gun placement is. Everything says there's more than one person who's involved here, because one person by themselves could not have done this, and if they did, it took them a hell of a long time. They were very patient. They were very, how would you say, they were artistic, would be a good word. They were artistic in everything they did. They changed everything up, and they didn't follow one set pattern. They didn't follow one set thing. They got creative, is a better word. They got very creative, and this is no. So everything in everything that I've seen from the photos tells me that at least two or more people, which two people constitutes a group, okay, two or more people were involved in this, because it could not have been carried out the way it did with just a singular person.
Okay, that explains a lot. And then thinking about that, and you think about the type of person and or people who would commit such a crime as this, and again, it's just a job. They're probably very detached from it. It's like, well, whatever, and then they have the added element of, hey, maybe they made them angry. It's like, well, you know what, I'm going to kind of be happy to do this because you ticked me off. We don't quite know all of it. But then that leads to, if these perpetrators were ever caught, well, and or I should say, if these perpetrators were ever brought to justice. I do believe personally the police know exactly or have a really good feeling, inkling as to who is involved. But let's say these people are now being brought to justice. Their attorneys are presenting their case before the courts. And in that regard, would these defendants, would it be an apparent case of mens rea, or could their attorneys then say, hey, they'll take a plea of insanity?
No. First of all, bad problem with that is, once again, insanity. An insanity plea normally is inferred or thought of as a singular crime, as like Ed Gein. He's a singular person, demented beyond the definition of demented. Okay, he was, wow. If you really want to look at the perfect example of a psychotic person who had a psychotic break, and you got to look at Ed Gein. He was the best, and I use that term very lightly. So, yes, he did at first. So, what I'm saying is, in mens rea, basically, what mens rea, it's a Latin word once again, and it means a guilty mind. Okay, the literal definition means a guilty mind. In other words, that says that first, in order to have a court case, mens rea has to be established. If mens rea is not established, you don't have a court case. Then you have to go get checked out psychologically, make sure you're competent to stand trial, blah, blah, blah. But if you're dealing with a group, then there is no way that that group went in there, did what they did, and then come to court and say, I didn't know. I had no idea this is wrong. You go and you rip the girl's arm off. I mean, hello. You crush your rib cage. You go, and the Quran itself, there's two things that tells me that they knew exactly what they were doing, is when they positioned the dead corpse of an infidel, and sorry for those who don't like that term, but they took the dead hand of an infidel, and they ripped the pages out of the Quran, they threw it on the floor, and then they put the hand on top of the Quran, and the Quran's on the floor. Hello. That shows signs of intent, of purpose. So you had to know what you were doing. Then there's the writing on the wall. And the idea is, if you know anything about Islam, if you know anything about their beliefs, you know anything about how they feel about the Quran, they're not creative artists. They're not going to go out there and try to go, ooh, please look at me. No, they do it and they tell you, we did it. End of story. So if you have this thing on the wall, you have a false narrative trying to be pushed. So that shows intent. That shows purpose. That shows that somebody knew what they were doing when they put their finger in the blood and they went and they drew a whatever, you know, just like the happy face murderers. If you go and you kill someone, then you draw a happy face, you know what you did was wrong. You know that it's going to get excitement out of people. You know you're going to catch someone's eye. It's intent. It's purpose. And that's what mens rea is. It shows intent. It shows purpose. It shows that I knew what I was doing is wrong and I could be arrested for this. So, no, if they try to cop an insanity plea on this, you don't have very good lawyers. And now, if you're a single person, yeah. And in this case, if you're a single person, sorry to say, but if you have a good lawyer, I can see a case of you getting off for having a mental deficit or something. But this is not by a single person. This is by a group of people who knew what, and everything about the case, everything about the scene says they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Just by the amount of mistakes and overkill and overstaging, as you have stated, it's an overstate, or to stage at all is someone who knows exactly what they're doing. They have to have a plan, and an insane person generally doesn't come up with plans like that.
Yeah.
So now, when it comes to the Crowley case, what strikes you the most about this case? What is it that jumps out at you?
Well, there's several things which seem to be very inconsistent, very not professional. First, there is the medical examiner. They give a call. The medical examiner does not show up. Here you got a triple homicide, or you got a triple murder. You got 3 people dead. One is a juvenile, and that is important. That is not saying that that a person dying is less significant than a kid, but somehow a kid that is there at a crime scene tends to put a little bit more weight into how your response should be. And so you have 2 adults and you have a juvenile, you have a young kid. And then the medical examiner doesn't send a deputy coroner, which, if they're busy, I understand that, but then they should send a deputy coroner. That was not done. So it takes them, 11 hours, I think I read. Then they get there, and mind you, have a child, you have the house, you have the perimeter of the house, then you have the inside of the house, and then finally, once again, you're working on a grid pattern. Once again, you come to the actual dead bodies themselves, and then you spend 45 minutes. Excuse me, but if something doesn't scream to the average person of foul, then I don't know what would, because that should have taken at least a day, 2 days to sit there and get all that information. But I know a hell of a lot longer than 45 minutes. So that in itself tells me there's something wrong. The other thing is the bullet. In the big thing that screams stage, being set up, people knowing something that is more than what they're telling, is that dumb bullet they found in the attic. First of all, you have to understand, when you're dealing with a crime scene, the one person who's in charge of that crime scene is not the police. The police are not in charge, even if they want to believe they are. They're not. It's the medical examiner. It's the forensic pathologist. Whoever. They own that crime scene. And until they say so, no one is allowed to go in there. And once that crime scene has been released by the forensic examiner, the pathologist, then it goes to the police. Once the police release that crime scene, it's over. It's done. You should have gotten all your evidence out before then. You should have called in your own techs. You should have went over that house from the basement to the attic. You should have been taking and videotaping, drawing, taking still pictures of everything. But the house was released. And then they come back sometime later and say, oh, we found a bullet in the ceiling. I'm sorry, in a court of law, that's going to get you nowhere, because that bullet then becomes inadmissible as evidence. So that is more wrong than I can even try to describe at this point. That's just so odd. So there was 4 things. And the third thing that strikes me as odd is the writing on the wall. Because you're looking at the whole crime scene as a whole. And all of a sudden, you have this man who was supposed to have killed these people, and he was supposed to have drawn on the wall. Now, I've read the report. I read the reports from the case. First of all, there is no mention of blood being found on any of his fingers. No mention of that at all. So who, if he didn't do it, who in the world wrote on the wall? Because there's no blood underneath his fingertips. I read the medical thing. That does not mention any blood or dry blood or any blood residue being found on his fingers. So who drew that? And then the other thing is it tries to make it clue in or tie in to something Islamic. Well, I'm sorry. You know, they're not Charles Manson. They're not out there to get glory. They're not out there to get kicks. If they do something, like I said, they go, they do it, and later on, they take responsibility and they claim for it. They don't sit there and go, ooh, let's go finger painting first. You know, it's not, that doesn't happen. So that is something that looks like it could be someone who have gone off script. It was someone who thought that, ooh, wow, well, I'm going to show them. And maybe they've watched too many Charles Manson movies. I don't know. But that just seems so out of place for this type of crime. And it seems so out of place for the type of person that David Crowley was. It just, you look at him, you look at his life, and it just doesn't jive. It doesn't look like he would be that type of person who would do that. Well, I'm going to get my kicks here. Now that I'm done finger painting, let me kill myself and put everything perfectly laid out. And, you know, I don't know. And then the last thing that strikes me as odd, as being staged, as they want to really get across and push a false narrative, is the Quran on the floor. And this is a big one. First, if you look at the hand's not only is it dead, it's emaciated. In other words, it's mummified. It's whatever. It looks gross. And here, so that's worse than just being dead. So here you have this infidel's hand who is totally corrupt, is totally, it looks like the night that the mummy came back alive or something, and it's laying on the Quran. Now, I don't care where it's laying at, because wherever it's laying at, that's a misdirection, what I believe to be a misdirection technique. It's the Quran itself is out of place. And someone's trying to make you believe that this is a hate crime, that this is something that's been religiously done. Let me tell you, no, and I will stand by this to the day I die. I have known good Islamic people. I'm not the biggest fan of Islam, but I have known good, honest, God-fearing people who belong to Islam. Okay? And I can tell you now, not one that I have ever come across would ever even conceive of doing something so heinous to the Quran. And to sit there, rip up its pages, and put it around, and then put the book, that holy book, however you want to believe or not. To them, it's a holy book. So you put that holy book on the floor, and then you put some desiccated can that looks like a stunt from the Mummy Returns or something, and then you put that on top of it. If that does not scream staged, because if you know about Islam, if there was the number one thing that would stand out for me among everything is that. That tells you it's staged. And whoever did this did not know anything or very little about the Quran or about Islam.
Yeah, okay, that's a lot. And I want to jump now back to the points you were making about the bullet in the ceiling. And also, you know, like you were stating, since that bullet was found a month later, a month after the crime scene had been released. Family members had been in the house, strangers had been in the house. You know, it had been in and out, traversed by multiple people. And then not to mention that the police didn't see this obvious defect in the ceiling, the cleaning, the crime scene cleaners, which this is what they do. This is their job. They look everywhere. A house is empty when they get there. They're, you know, so as they're trying to clean up and fix the crime scene the best they can, they don't see it. You know, family members don't, nobody sees it until an entire month later after the crime scene had been released. There is no way and then that would ever, it shouldn't even be part of the evidence. It should be a moot point, correct?
Yes. That bullet doesn't mean squat. Because you understand when crime scene techs come in, you have to understand what they do. They just don't go in there with a sponge and a bucket and start wiping down things. No, carpets are pulled up. They're discarded. The floorboards, everything that has blood on it is taken up. And wall gets redone. Everything. I mean, if there's blood on there, they don't sit there and say, "Oh, well, we're going to take this." You know, no, it's not done that way. Things are cut out. Things are replaced. The boards along the floor, that's taken up. The actual floorboards are taken up, and they are looking for all the evidences of blood. And so they have to get all that up. And to sit there and say that these people were negligent in their duties, and I know a lot of crime scene techs, they take pride in what they do. And you have a whole house. They have to go from the basement all the way up to the attic, and they have to look. They have to make sure they clean out everything, because when the other people are going to come in to live, you don't want people coming in there and finding blood or, you know, bullet holes and everything, and that's going to freak people out. So they did a good job, but the fact that they missed this, now, when the cleaning people came, the techs came, they cleaned everything, then that means that hole in the ceiling had to have been fixed. They had to have fixed it. They should have took pictures of it. They, you know, on, and then you go and you trace that bullet. And then when you get up to the ceiling, you retrace it back to make sure that it is the bullet that belongs to that hole. Because just because you have a bullet there doesn't mean it corresponds to the hole. So you trace that hole. This is where forensic reconstruction comes in. You take that and you trace that bullet hole. You find out where that bullet was, and then you retrace it back. And all that should have been logged in. All of that should have been categorized, everything, before they released the house. But the moment they released the house, and if they miss something, oh well, that's on you.
Okay, let me interrupt you here and ask you real quick. Now, what would have happened, you know, because some people want to give these police officers the benefit of the doubt, but I'm sorry, everyone was going in and out of that house for 11, 12, 15 hours, and nobody saw it. I'm not one of those people. You know, I'm going to call it like I see it, and I'm going to say it wasn't there because somebody would have seen it. So let's say, for argument's sake, the police officers, by some miracle, missed this, and then the cleaning, and then everything was released, crime scene is released, and then the cleaning crew come in, and then say all of a sudden now they find the hole. It's 2-3 days later, but the crime scene has been released. At that point, would the bullet be admissible in a court of law?
Yes, I would say so. Because even though the crime scene itself, per se, was released, the crime has not been adjudicated. The crime is not over. Now, if the cleaning people came in and they didn't find anything and they released the home, because you got the The pathologist who releases it to the police. The police then, when they're done, gives it to the crime scene cleaning people. It is the crime scene cleaning people who have to submit saying the house is now okay. And once that paperwork is submitted, then if you go in there and you find something, oh well, too bad. You should have caught it, because now anything could have been there. And it's the fact that, see, if you have a bullet, you have to sit back and you have to play a mental picture in your mind. And a lot of times this is what behaviorists do. They go in and they look and they try to draw a mental picture in their mind as to how the events happened. What was the steps of the event? And you try to run that mental picture over in your mind. Now, you have a bullet who was supposed to have been his bullet that killed him. Now, as a bullet enters the body, it's going to leave distinctive marks, and it's going to leave distinctive marks on the bullet. Now, there is no way in God's green or polluted earth as today that a bullet can go through a biological mass and not retain some type of remnants of that biological mass. It can't happen. It's just, and to say that it did, you're lying. I'm going to straight out say that the people are lying, because it can't. Now, if that bullet goes through the roof, now mind you, that the remnants of that biological mass could come off, but that means that evidence of that biological mass is embedded in the ceiling somewhere. They should have been able to do that. When they looked at the bullet, and if what I read was correct, I'm sorry, that bullet, it seems that the bullet was placed. You cannot have a bullet. You can't have a bullet that goes through a biological mass and you find no trace of that biological mass on the bullet. You can't. It's impossible. And I'm sorry, but you're not talking to an idiot. And so, you know, I think that's no. So.
Yeah, and especially since the bullets used were hollow points. I mean, once they hit a hard surface like the skull or whatever, and with all of the other hollow points that were recovered, you see hair and tissue entangled within the fragment itself, and because that's just the nature of a hollow point. It mushrooms out, it collects, pulls in. So there's no way, it didn't go through David. It just didn't. Okay, now the last question that I have that I think is kind of important for, I don't know, I think for a lot of us, because everyone who I know that's associated with trying to help with this case, I think this will be helpful. How should we be approaching this case? Because right now we have a lot of people who are earnestly trying to help, but it seems like there are a lot of fingers and everybody's going like this. There's no continuity, and I think personally, and could be wrong, but I think if we're going to get forward and move forward, we have all got to get on the same page and move forward. We can't keep doing this because we have no momentum, but if we can get together, find that common ground, then how is it that we can do that, and how should we be approaching this case?
The only way that you're going to know how to approach this case is to, at least to go forward, is to know what is your motive for researching this case. What are your motives? And what is the agenda to finding out about this case? Now, do you want to just to clear the guy's name, and then and that's all you want to do? Do you want to try to catch the killers, which I personally would say I would not advise. I would not advise that approach. And so I think the explanation there is self-explanatory, at least for me it is. But it depends on your motives for doing the case. Now, you have some people whose motives is not, and I've seen, or I've got an inkling of this, is they're not very altruistic. And so you want to, if the people who are altruistic and they really are, they're looking at to clear this person's name, and that's what they want to do, not trying to catch the perpetrators, then you need to distance yourself from those who do not have the same altruistic view if you want to move forward. You really have to distance yourself from them. And then to move forward, remembering that your part in this actually is insignificant. It's inconsequential. You have to, the moment you think that you have a really good part in this, then you should stop. But your part in this, not yours, but you know, the group's part or whatever in this becomes self-centered, or oh, I want to get my 15 minutes of fame, then you need to stop. But so you continue forward, putting evidence above everything else, above personal opinion, above personal belief. You let the evidence speak for itself. You let the evidence guide you in a direction it wants you to go into. Now, if you're doing something other than that, then I would say you need to either stop or take a step back and reevaluate. Because when you're going to go forward in this case, you have to make sure that you get rid of those who do not share the same altruistic view. You have to get rid of self. You have to say this is evidence and evidence only, and regardless of the outcome, I'm going to go where evidence leads me. And you should stay true to that. You should not give in to anything else. Stay true to the evidence, not stay true to yourself, because you are inconsequential. But stay true to the evidence. Let the evidence point you in the direction that you want to go to. And if you have altruistic feelings or motives for this, then the evidence will guide you in the proper path where you can, for you to move on.
Okay, because for me, I have been frustrated by the groups, the Justice for David Crowley and Family group, a lot, and mainly, and it's probably me, but it's like there are things, evidence is evidence, and I find it really hard for I need to put this delicately because I don't want to hurt feelings, but at the same time, it is what it is. Like with medicine, if a medical thing is in this case, it is. There's no supposition. There's no opinion. It just is, because that's how it works. And if something lands a certain way, it frustrates me that a lot of people tend to go off on tangents and trying to figure out multiple different ways how it could have got there or how something could have happened, when in reality it's only one way. Okay, for example, blood can only come out of the body so many ways. By blunt force, by sharp force entry, crush injuries, internal. There's only so many ways. And this evidence will tell you which way that blood came out of the body. So then to sit into, and I'm just using this as an example. So then to have a bunch of people come in and you're like going, okay, here it is. Here's medical explanation. you okay, stop, here's the medical explanation. And then people come around going, well, I kind of don't know, and I don't really think, and maybe it happened this way. And I'm like going, oh my God, it is what it is. So I lose my patience that way. And so I see that we spend as a group a lot of time not being cohesive. And I see that as destructive because you were asking what's the motive. Now, the motivation, at least that I've heard from Dan Hennon, is that we truly want to get clear David's name. I don't know of anybody and there may be some, who want to quote unquote catch the killers. That's not my motive. That's not even a desire of mine. Don't want to walk down that path. Don't want to end up like the Crowleys, okay? I kind of like living. So, but at the same time, without that cohesiveness and with the main sole purpose of clearing David's name and getting him off of the register of abusers, spousal abusers, how do we do that? Or is it time should someone like me walk away due to all this frustration, or should I just suck it up, put on my big girl panties, and just, keep going and try to filter out what's going on? But at the same time, I don't know how to filter it out because it's happening so often. And I know that was kind of a convoluted question, but maybe you could answer.
No, makes sense to me, believe it or not. You have to ask yourself, what is my motive, not for getting into this case, but what is my motive for staying in this case with all the extra peripheral things that are going on? Have I lost that altruistic view? Who is there trying to destroy, dismantle, invade that altruistic view? You need to separate yourself from them. If you come to a point where it seems it's impossible to separate yourself from them, and that your objectivity for the evidence is being compromised, even in the most slightest of ways, then it may be time to step back, reevaluate your motives, and maybe do the thing that becomes the hardest, and that is to step away. Because a person's not doing David Crowley any good. It's not doing his wife, not doing his child. It's not doing this case any good if there's constant tension, if there's constant strife, if there's constant backbiting, if there's constant second guessing, because these are all distractors. And whenever you have a distractor, then that's when you should stop and you say, okay, why are these distractors here? Why are they here? And you may not get the answer, but the overall answer is that they shouldn't be there. So think to yourself, maybe it's time for me to step away. And if somewhere in time, if everyone gets onto the same page, or at least those people who have the same altruistic view, if those people have the same motivation, and they want to be evidence-led, they want to clear his name based upon where the evidence leads, if somewhere in the future that you happen to come together, then reevaluate your motive. But right now, it seems that it's too much of a distractor, and it's not a good thing. Maybe one should stop and say, is this really worth it? Where am I going? What is the end result of this? And why am I getting, it seems like getting stopped or stifled at every turn? So I don't need this. So therefore, I don't have to do this. And so therefore, as much as I care about the case, I understand that it's not about me. And so, therefore, once you realize it's not about you, you are inconsequential, it becomes immeasurably easier to walk away. Because it's not about you. It's about David Crowley. And these other people, it's about them. It's not about David Crowley. Oh, yeah, the facade is, oh, yeah, it's about David Crowley and his wife and his daughter. No, it's about you. And when you deal with forensics, the hardest thing in forensics, this is why forensics is not for everyone. Because in forensics, you have to realize whether you're married, you have kids, whether you're waited 3 years to go on a vacation, and all of a sudden you can never turn off your phone, and as you're about ready to enter that plane, you get a call for a mass casualty, you have to go. Despite whether or not your family's still going to get on the plane and go. You have got to stay. You have got, because it's not about you. And if you cannot come to that level, to that way of thinking, then you have to ask yourself, why am I doing this then? So it might be best if someone would just step back, walk away for a time, separate themselves from those people who it's about them. And it's not about the case. So that's the one thing you have to always remind yourself is, I'm not important. I'm inconsequential. This is not about me. This is about the evidence. This is about the victim. And if I can't keep on that string, if I cannot keep on that line of thought, and you got all these other things, the peripheral things that keep coming up and trying to keep you from that, then that's an indication it's time for someone to step aside. And if you don't, then you can only blame yourself for any of the stuff that happens later.
Okay, and that's great advice. And it's kind of how I feel and how I felt the last time I kind of walked away from the case for a while. For me personally, I don't know what else I can bring to the table. When something is presented and it can't be argued because it is what it is, a mug is a mug. You can't call it, a glass slipper. And sometimes I feel like that's what's taken. For me, it's frustrating. It's like, why am I wasting? And wasting my time is not the right word. Why am I putting effort into something that I have to constantly go back and reiterate 50,000 times? It's like, ... And then somebody else comes in and it's like, but you're not medical, that's not how it goes, and it's ... And so for me, that's where my frustration comes in. But say I could put aside my frustration, how could I then be part of that glue that kind of gets us going in a cohesive direction? Because again, if everybody's too busy throwing out theories all of the time instead of looking at the evidence and, like you said, allowing the evidence to point the direction, and it's like opinions and theories are pointing the direction and not the evidence, how can I, as being a part of this group, help guide that direction, guide that flow, or can I?
Here's the sad reality. Whether we want to accept it or not, there's a good possibility that you will never be able to do that. Okay? And one has got to accept that outcome. One of the reasons why I don't love and I don't like forensics. And a lot of people, especially my students, what do you mean, Professor Berry? Well, no, I don't love it and I don't like it because I believe love and like is tantamount to a hobby. And for me, forensics is not a hobby. I am passionate about it. That's one thing I love about evidence. Evidence is what it is. No matter if I'm black, blue, if I'm Swahili, if I'm French, doesn't matter. It is what it is. And people, if people cannot accept that, then they haven't been able to lose themselves. And so, and if people don't want to do something, no matter what you do, you'll never be able to get them to do it. Never. It's not going to happen. It's energy being wasted, and you're wasted. For me, one of my pet peeves in life, and this is the one thing that I cannot tolerate, I absolutely will not tolerate, is unmitigated ignorance. And when unmitigated ignorance is ignorance without an excuse. And once you have someone who is like what my favorite person other than God, my favorite person in life is Einstein. And he said that the classical definition of insanity is a person who tries something, gets a wrong result, but yet keeps trying the same thing, hoping for a different result. It's not going to happen. So it may be that people who are in the same dilemma as you, it might be time to step aside, and then in your own time, without the connection of the group, in your own time, keep investigating. Because if your altruism is true, and you really desire to follow the evidence, and you really want to help do this, and then when you find that smoking gun, the proverbial smoking gun, and you have all your T's crossed and all your I's dotted, then present it to the group. But just keep going. If that's what makes you happy, keep going, but just eliminate the peripheral hiccups.
Well, thank you. That was very, very insightful, and thank you for joining the show today. And hopefully we can do this again. And I really like to follow along the lines that this forensic psychology is just, it's fascinating. It's not at all what, like I said, what I first thought way back in the beginning what forensic psychology was. It's kind of like my mindset was that, forensics was the crime scene and like the blood and the gore, when it's not. It really has to do with how the psychology can be of a crime scene be applied to the law. And so thank you, Russell, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And everybody else out there in Yahoo, YouTube land is probably Yahoo land by now, and Facebook land, thank you. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and we'll do it again.